Well, the first United Methodist appointment Wanda and I ever had was to the McCook Lake United Methodist Church in North Sioux City, now known as the Ark United Methodist Church. Now that church had quite a history. It began as a small mission church, and then Gateway Computers moved into North Sioux City. The town boomed, the church boomed right along with it. They were averaging over 200 people in worship on a Sunday morning. It looked like that was going to grow to more. The church's future looked incredibly bright. And then Gateway ran into trouble. They started cutting back, and eventually they pulled out of North Sioux City. And the town faltered, and the church faltered right along with it. Number of people in worship plummeted. When Wanda and I got to North Sioux City, this church, which had been averaging more than 200 people in worship, was down to about 25. When we got there, we were told that we had 3 years to get the church turned around or it was going to be closed. And in fact, at the first church meeting after we got there, we were told that we were going to have to leave our building within 2 months and find another place to worship, and we didn't have one. So that's why the picture of the school's up there. That's where eventually we started worshiping. We worshiped in the lunchroom of the elementary school at North Sioux City. It's where we held worship services for most of the 3 years Wanda and I were there. So anyway, there we were, our first United Methodist appointment. Not really knowing what we were doing anyway, a couple of small town people now in a suburb of the big city, at least a big city for this area. Told to find a way to get this church turned around in 3 years or it was going to be closed, without even having a building to worship in. Talk about a stressful situation. Well, as you might guess, we prayed a lot. And as I was praying one day, this thought struck me. If God wants this church to be here, then it's going to be here no matter what I do, because I'm not stronger than God. And if God does not want this church to be here, then it won't be here no matter what I do, because I'm not stronger than God. And that does not mean that I decide to sit back and do nothing. What it means is, Wanda and I both decided that we were going to do our best to follow God, to serve God, and then we'd see what God decided to do with that. If God decided to bless it, the church would grow. If not, then it would not. The point is that what we realized is that it was not our job to determine the results. It was God's job to do that. And so we needed to trust God to make the result come out the way it was supposed to. All our job was just to be faithful to God and do the best that we could. And when we realized that, it took an awful lot of that stress away. Wanda and I still worked hard, but we knew that if we stayed faithful to God and did the best we could, the result did not matter. If we stayed faithful to God, we would have succeeded, no matter what the actual result was going to be. We talked last week about how after Jesus died, at first the disciples did not know what they were supposed to do. Jesus told them to go and spread the gospel, to make disciples of all nations, and that's what they decided to do. Now the disciples had no guarantee of what was going to happen when they went out to spread Jesus' message. I'm sure they had hopes. I'm sure they had dreams, just like Wanda and I had hopes and dreams when we got to North Sioux City. I'm sure they were hoping that they would make hundreds, thousands of converts. They were probably dreaming of a day when everyone they talked to would believe in Jesus and be saved. But at the same time, they'd been with Jesus for about 3 years. They saw what happened when Jesus spread the gospel message. There were some people who believed, but there were some people who did not. There were people who rejected Jesus' message immediately. There were others who followed for a while and then lost interest. And of course, they saw what happened to Jesus himself. He was killed on a cross. If that could happen to Jesus, the disciples surely knew that it could happen to them too. So that also was a pretty stressful situation for the disciples to be in. And the disciples did not know how things were going to go when they just started spreading the gospel. They realized they did not need to know what the result was going to be. Jesus had told them to go and spread the gospel and make disciples of all nations. And so they decided to do the best they could to do that. They would do their best to follow God, to serve God. And then they'd see what God was going to do with that. If God decided to bless their work, then the gospel message would be spread. If not, then it would not. The disciples realized that it was not their job to determine the result. It was God's job to do that. They trusted that God would make the result come out the way it was supposed to go. Their job was simply to be faithful to the task that Jesus had given them, to do the best they could. If they did that, if they did their best to follow God and to serve God, then they were going to have succeeded no matter what the results might be. And I suspect that knowing that took a lot of their stress away too. Well, the result, at least at the time of our Bible reading for today, is that the disciples got hauled up before the Sanhedrin, which was the Jewish ruling authority. Sanhedrin basically said, hey, we told you guys to stop telling people about Jesus, and yet you are going around talking about nothing else. Now, what do you think you're doing? And the disciples basically say, well, you can tell us whatever you want, but we have to do what God has told us to do. God told us to spread this message. And yeah, we know you might try to stop us. We cannot control what you do. We can only control what we do. What we're going to do is follow God, so you do whatever you need to do. We tend to kind of gloss over that part. But think of the faith that takes. I mean, Sanhedrin could have had them put in prison for life. There would have been nothing they could have done about it. And back then, prison was a really bad place to be. Not that it's a great place now, but prisons were really awful back then, and just the unsanitary conditions could kill you. And yet here the disciples are, standing up before the Sanhedrin and saying, hey, do whatever you're going to do. We don't care. We have to follow God. We're going to follow God no matter what you do to us. Again, they were going to be faithful to God, trust God, and trust that God was going to make things come out the way that things were supposed to come out. Well, when the disciples said that, the Pharisees were up in arms. They were furious. Some were wanting to kill Peter and the others, despite the fact that they really did not have the power to impose the death penalty. They wanted to do it anyway. Then a Pharisee named Gamaliel speaks. And Gamaliel, I think, takes a similar attitude to the one I took in North Sioux City. He says to the others, look, if God is not behind what these people are doing, then we don't have to do anything. What they're doing will fail because they're not stronger than God. But if God is behind what these people are doing, then nothing we do is going to stop them. Because guess what, guys? We're not stronger than God either. So you know what? We don't have to take on the stress of defending God. God can defend himself. So let these people go and wait and see what God decides to do. And it seems to me that that's a pretty good attitude to take to almost every aspect of our lives. In fact, it seems to me that it would make a lot of our lives less stressful if we took that attitude. Whatever our situation, whether we're talking about work or home or family situations or whatever, do the best we can. Do the best we can to love God, to serve God, to be faithful to God. And realize that if we do that, we are not responsible for the result because we cannot control what anybody else does. The one who's responsible for the result is God. And we can trust God to make that result be what it's supposed to be. That may not mean that it goes the way we want it to go, but it'll go the way it's supposed to go. It'll be what it's supposed to be. It's not our job to get a result. It's our job to be faithful to God, do the best we can to serve God, and show love to God. If we do that, then in God's eyes we will have succeeded, no matter what the earthly result might be. It's not always easy to give control of the results to God, is it? We tend to want to control those results ourselves. And sometimes maybe we can. But my experience has been that when I try too hard to control things, when I try too hard to get a certain result, what I usually end up doing is trying to force things. I try to force things to go my way, and I try to force people to do what I want them to do, and that does not work very well. Most of the time it does not work at all. When you think about it, you can see why. Even God does not force us to do things the way God wants us to. If God does not force people to do things, why would I think I can do it? Why would I think I should do it? Why would I think it's going to work if I do it? It's not. If we just do our best, if we leave the results to God, then we don't feel a need to force anything. We can relax. We can let go of the stress. We can let God take care of things. Because God is always stronger than we are. If God wants things to happen in a certain way, they will happen that way, no matter what you and I do. And if God does not want things to happen in a certain way, then they won't happen that way, no matter what you and I do. Again, that's not an excuse for doing nothing. What it's saying is, let's all do the best we can to serve God, to follow God, to love God, and let's trust God to take it from there. That'll take a lot of the stress out of our lives. And if we stay faithful to God, then in God's eyes we will always succeed, no matter what the results on earth might be. Amen.